We were going to talk about this Hidden Brain episode. It came out, I think, on November 23rd, and it's on gratitude. But I thought it was more interesting on the subject of willpower, and more interesting, particularly to the extent that it talks about like the limitations of willpower. Essentially, there's only so much willpower that you can assert to just override your natural inclinations, right? And they suggest instead that one at least there's an experiment that they did in which they asked the users, or they induced the feelings of gratitude in the users. And after they induced the feelings of gratitude, the people showed more willpower. So I guess I'll just tell you some of the experiments because I think they're kind of interesting. Or you can tell them too if you want, Elsa. But there's the classic marshmallow one, but they do a version for adults where you're asked to either get money right now or you're asked to wait to get the money later. So maybe, and there are all sorts of different numbers, like maybe it's a year later, and maybe it's, $10 now, and $50 a month later. So just these different amounts. And they said in the podcast, the Hidden Brain podcast, they said that one user chose to get $17 now rather than the guarantee of $100 later. And they said, that's pretty bad investment. If you had any investment vehicle in which you could pay $17 now and get $100 later, you'd be wanting to put like all of your money in it because it's such a great rate of return on your money if you can just wait. And they kind of say, but people weren't willing to wait.
Let me interrupt you there.
Yeah.
I mean, what if he was just like, being really smart to take like the money, like the little amount of money now, because I mean, who can predict the future so far, like 1 year? I mean, you don't know if the company or the research facility goes bankrupt by then and then you get nothing, or if the people just lie to you and then in like 1 year you do not get anything. And then, I mean, you won't like take a lawyer to sue them just to get your $100 or whatever.
Yes.
And I mean, not like, relying on the money, then I don't know, maybe I would also take like the $17 now and say like, yeah, screw the rest, because now I at least have like a little amount for sure. And yeah, whatever happens in the future, you do not know. So
yes, I like that perspective. I think that's true too. So tell me then, I'll tell them that was like the first one they did. And then the second one they did is they induced you to feel gratitude. And how they did that is you had to do this very difficult task, and then you finished it. And then the computer like went down, and then the researchers would come and be like, oh no, the computer went down, you'll have to do it all over again. And then a Confederate in there would be like, hold it, I'm pretty good with computers. Let me do a couple things, and they would go over there, and then bam, the computer would come back up, right? It's all like this plot. And after that, they were so grateful. Thank you so much. And then they were asked this question, hey, do you want $100 in a year or $17 now? And people were comparatively, the researchers said, because they attribute it to willpower, you say maybe you don't attribute it to willpower, but it doubled their willpower. So instead of accepting $17 now, they accept $34 after they experience the gratitude. Now, what do you think about that? Do you still think maybe it's not about willpower?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that like seems like it's like really, really far. And I think you need like really a lot of imagination to like put these pieces together. And like, I think in like psychology a lot, people just like, if you want to assume something and if you want to find something, you usually also like find that. And then you can just connect like weird things together and see like a connection there and say it's like there's like correlation. And I'm not really sure if I would really trust that. And I mean, it might be true, but I think it's hard to imagine that that's actually true.
Yeah. Okay. So the difference though between this is after they experience gratitude, they do, for whatever reason, all the people, they have a sample size or whatever, they accept, they choose to accept a higher amount of money, which seems kind of weird too, because if they're being selfish, maybe they're being even more selfish because they're like, no, I need to be paid at least $34 now in order to compensate me, or $100 later. I think it's interesting. It's just interesting kind of that gratitude changes people's kind of mentality. But then they also do this, when they induce people for gratitude, they have other things where they leave the lab and they have somebody, who's on crutches and has like one of these like braces on their foot. It looks like they broke their foot, and they're walking down the hall in crutches or something. And these type of things where they'll help the person, or they'll give up the seat to the person. That this also happens with gratitude. And do you think there's any connection there, or are you kind of like, no?
No, I really don't think that there's like a connection between gratitude. I mean, why should you like, I don't know, help someone because you feel grateful? I think there is more like other emotions, like I don't know, taking part. But I don't think that it's like that gratitude is like heighten your willpower by a lot. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I don't know, like in the podcast, I don't know if they just like ignored the biological part, or if they, yeah, if they know it, but they choose to not tell about that. But I mean, actually, that is something that is like really good, like examined. So like that when you're using self-control, that self-control requires sufficient glucose levels in the brain, and if you're using self-control, that it kind of depletes the glucose. And yeah, I mean, if you have like low and I mean, a lot of researchers, I think, actually found out that low glucose levels in the brain or in the blood in general are correlated with lower performance in self-control tests. And I think this is something that is like, there's like a lot of like research on that and studies. And I don't know if like people just, or researchers just need something new, so they start to try to correlate like weird things like gratitude with willpower and self-control. And I mean, it might be right and there might be a connection, but I think they need to do some more studies because I wouldn't trust it right now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
Okay.
also don't think, I'm not sure if the emotion they invoke is gratitude. It could be social pressure showing you're indebted to someone that fixed the computer, or someone less fortunate than you. Then you
Yep.
feel pressure to, I don't know, ask for money right away.
So it could be because he says DeSteno is the researcher who's on the podcast, and he argues that emotions like gratitude and compassions are virtues because the origin of willpower was to keep us from burning these social ties, these bridges, and taking advantage of the relationships we have. So he gives the example: if I borrow $10 from you, Victoria, and don't pay it back, I'm ahead financially. But what happens when I need help moving my stuff? Then you'll remember maybe that I didn't have that $10. And I said I'd reference Arthur, and here we go. Arthur has suggested to me before that he's traveled in Albania, and he says that Albanians seem to be more social, little community oriented, right? And he thinks that it's because people in Albania don't have money. They communicate more, and the relationships are more important because, as he said, quote, you need people to help you move if you don't have money. Right. So I thought it was interesting that both the podcast and Arthur used the same example of you need people to help you move. So you guys are saying that it's not gratitude necessarily. It's not maybe necessarily an emotion at all, but it's just this kind of reminder that you have different social ties with people and interconnectedness. And that is what changes whether you're going to help somebody right after, or that changes your idea about, whether maybe the likelihood of getting that $100 in the future. Maybe it seems more likely for some reason if you have just experienced some social interconnectedness that you may be grateful for, but it's not necessarily the gratitude emotionally that is helping you with the willpower. Is that what I hear you guys saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I also think that.
Okay. So that sounds good to me too, and he goes kind of into like, he's like these emotions, emotions we think of, and I thought it was interesting because we experience emotions differently, right? So for the people who are listening, maybe that are a little bit normal, he talks about how neurotypical, I should say, he talks about how people think of emotions as being kind of like these bad things that you have to overcome, right? So you have like lust, or you have greed, and you're constantly kind of battling these bad emotions that are telling you to just do the wrong thing now. Like, I guess almost like these temptations. You want to cheat on your spouse, and so you have to use the willpower to fight this emotion of desire.
I think what you're saying is like bad things, like the things like we have to fight like all day. I think that's more like the things society think that are bad, because I don't think they are like bad in general, because I don't know, there's like, I think it's not bad in general. It's just like the view of society that it's like a bad thing.
Yes.
Just like,
yes. So I agree too. But I thought it was interesting even that they're experiencing this like war within themselves. Like, you experience a war within yourself, Elsa, this emotional war?
no, but I know that like sometimes like I need to use self-control, because like sometimes, I don't know, like someone is annoying me a lot, and then I want to hit them like in the face. But then I know, okay, you cannot do that here, because first we're in public, and second, like I don't know, you can't just hit someone because you go to prison or whatever. And no one wants to interact with you anymore if you do that. So I need that like self-control to not do that. But I don't know, if we were in the past, and if we were like, I don't know, hunting like elephants or whatever, then maybe that would be an advantage if they just like hit someone if he's annoying me, and like bothering me, like I don't know, a guy or whoever. So I think it's more like the society, like kind of like in terms of the society, where we need to use our self-control, and if we are feeling like the fight, like to fight, I don't know, like different temptations.
So it's interesting. So again, you kind of mentioned the reason why you would want to use the self-control largely would be because of like the community aspect of life, is that if you punch somebody in the face and there are other people watching, maybe those people are going to exclude you for future opportunities that you'd want. Does that sound right? Correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So he
Like,
kind of talks about like for these people that have this war of feelings inside them. So they have this desire, and they feel, and he says kind of that they feel like they have to use their rationality to overcome this feeling, right? So that they have to force themselves. He calls it like a corrective measure. The brain, kind of I guess the super ego, if you're using Freudian terms, has to come in and tell the id, no, we're not going to punch the guy in the face, right? For whatever reason. But it sounds like you don't have the war really at all. Your default is just to think of it rationally, like, okay, even though there's an impulse, who knows where this impulse is coming from? It's just coming from some weird neurons in the brain firing this particular way. Even though you have an impulse to punch somebody in the face, your rational brain comes in and says, no, we're not going to listen to this impulse because it doesn't make sense to do that right now.
yeah, basically. And I think like other people might have like the same, like they come to the same conclusion, probably also like with using like self-control. But I think for them, like often there's like another component, like, oh yeah, if I would do that, I would be like a bad person, because I do not want to hurt anyone, because I'm not a bad person. And yeah.
Yes. So we'll get to this. I think that is an interesting point that he makes about kind of like this self-conception, like the role that self-conception plays in these different things. But just to kind of wrap up like what he was saying about emotions, he thinks that, number one, he thinks that normal people think of emotions as something that happens to them regarding past incidents. So they think of emotions as like, something made me sad and now I'm sad. So the thing that you're sad about is the past or whatever. And he tries to tell people, emotions are all about future events, which is, I think, true, evolutionarily speaking. If you're sad about something, it's to try to help you learn a lesson so that you don't do the thing in the future. If you're sad that you were reckless with your ice cream cone, fell on the ground, and now you've lost this nutritional source of nutrition, then evolutionary
Ice cream is that nutritional. I don't think it has that many like nutrients that are like
Let's just
required.
say calorically dense. Then your mind is like, you're sad because you lost this calorically dense source of calories, this glucose for your brain to help it make these willpower choices. And so then the sadness is to try to make you learn, so you're more careful with the ice cream in the future. That's kind of what the steno is saying. I thought it was weird that people think of emotions as something in the past. I was like, that surprises me to hear that normal people think of their emotions as something like, nope, the reason why I'm sad is this past thing. And that's the role of emotions, is for me to just, I don't know, ruminate over the past, just to keep being sad for some reason. I was like, is that a normal way to view your emotions? Okay. So that kind of surprised me. And then he says, though, his kind of like big insight is, he's like, researchers focus on these like core negative emotions like fear and anger. And he's like, well, what about these more complex emotions that can actually help us do the things that we want to do? And so that's a little bit his angle. And you have kind of shot down some of his research about this as maybe this is not what's actually happening in the research. And it is true. I mean, maybe they have some gratitude measures or something. In the podcast, they were kind of quick about it. I didn't actually read the research. But he suggests that one of the things, and he, anecdote, he just uses the example of one of his former students who would wake up every morning to go rowing in the Columbia River. And, it's hard to do because, it's taxing and it's cold and she has to wake up early and take the time to do it. And he said that one of the reasons why she would do it is this positive emotion of the pride in herself and the pride in her team and this sense of team camaraderie. So he said positive emotions can actually help us, so we don't have to use our willpower. So I thought that was interesting. Let's move on to this second section of,
Wait.
go ahead.
I think
Yep.
it's not only, I mean, sure, she feels like gratitude or pride or whatever for helping her team, but I think it's also that it's becoming like a habit for her to just get up in the morning and to go like rowing. And then it's like so like in her daily life that she just does it like automatically. Like, for example, I read like from people who are going like running in the morning, and they said like in the beginning it was like really hard, like they had to force themselves out of the bed, and sometimes they need to go to bed and already wearing their clothes that they want to wear when they're going running, because then it's getting like a little bit easier. But then they, after some while, like after, I don't know, like a month, 2 months, a year, whatever, it became such a habit, like, I don't know, brushing your teeth, that they just do it automatically. And if they do not do it, then it's like, oh wait, there's something weird, I need to do something. Oh yeah, right, I didn't go running in the morning. And I think this is like something that he also kind of ignores, that there's like the habit coming in.
Yes, I think so. And he kind of suggests, and I don't know that he has that much empirical support for this, but he suggests, he does reference habits. He says there's a lot of work these days on habits. Build a habit so that you can achieve your goal. Build a habit so you can save money, I guess. But the problem with most habits is that they're focused on one narrow outcome. He says, if I build a habit to study more, it's not going to help me save money. But if you build a habit to cultivate gratitude, it's going to play out in many different domains. And this is because his argument is that gratitude, or setting yourself up for different kind of like way of thinking, he says it's not increasing your self-control by giving you more willpower. It's working from the bottom up by changing what you value. So if you value something more than you normally would, like future health or doing the right thing for your friends, then it just becomes easier to persevere toward it.
I think
Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think like positive emotions work, like pride or gratitude. It's because of instant gratification. Like if you're building habits for making more money in the future, it's in the future. But positive emotion, you feel it right now, and feeling those positive emotions kind of build on your identity. Like, why would people care about wanting to feel pride or gratitude? I feel like it's because it adds positive attributes to your identity that serve as an incentive for you to acquire more things in life later. So it's like a instant gratification.
Yes. It's interesting. And go ahead, Elsa. You had also had a comment.
So what I do not understand is like how gratitude is like changing you like for the positive and like, you know, like saving money for the future. Because what I would have thought and what I think is like kind of logical is that if you like feel gratitude, that you're kind of like grateful for what you have, and that you're like, oh, okay, I didn't get like this better job, but I'm very grateful that I have a job at all. And then you do not feel as bad like for failing, like not getting the better job. I think this is what gratitude is, and I do not understand like how it like, yeah.
So for you, Elsa, it sounds like gratitude is more like self-reflection. Is like, okay, yes, I didn't get, the best ice cream, let's say, but I have ice
Yeah,
cream. Yeah. And
yeah,
so you're just kind of
compared to
like,
something, yeah,
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 you're expanding your perception of the world to like include more things. Like, okay, yes, my narrow situation, this was a disappointment, but when
yeah,
you expand your vision to include more things, you can see that you have, like you've done well for yourself, let's say, in other areas that can compensate for this disappointment. And so reflecting, that's kind of interesting to kind of take like a broader perspective. And actually there's kind of research that suggests this, what you have just suggested, and less maybe gratitude. It's funny that normal people would kind of think that maybe it's more gratitude. But one thing that's interesting, and you can kind of see it in like the Mormon culture, is that there's research that suggests that if you kind of expand your view to include your ancestors and learn more about your ancestors and the things that they went through, then you have more resilience. You have like more emotional resilience, more psychological resilience, and you could kind of say probably willpower, honestly, at this time, because their theory there is because you see that the people kind of like you, because you share the same genes, have been able to go through very hard things and still survive. So it's just like an increased perspective. You learn a story about something in which somebody a little bit like you also did a hard thing and was able to accomplish it. So you feel like you also have that ability to go through hard things and accomplish your goals type thing. What do you think about that?
yeah. I think like that, like, yeah, that I think that's right, and I think that can help if you just like think, well, if people think about like people who went through the same. And I mean, they're like, I mean, people go to like support groups for reasons. So I think that helps to have people that are doing the same things, that are going through the same, yeah, things.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And let's pick up this other perspective that Victoria suggested, which is that there's some role of identity here. And I kind of think, and let's call it maybe a little bit more this, because I don't even know that it's super identity oriented. I've been calling it kind of in my head, maybe for the past decade or two, thinking this, an aesthetic. And I'll give you kind of an example of what I mean. So I was trained as a musician. So is my brother, trained as a musician. And there have been times when we have participated together as musicians, kind of conducting or leading different groups, or trading leading different groups like a choir or an instrumental ensemble. And it's interesting to watch him, and then kind of knowing myself, like there are different things that just bother him more. Like for him, tone quality, he'll stop the group, he'll stop and just spend like 20 minutes on just like improving people's tone quality, like, oh, spin the air faster, do this, or he has all these kind of tricks to kind of get people to have like a better tone quality, either to their singing voice or to their instrument playing. And for me, I rarely do that. I almost never stop it. And you can tell his groups sound great. Their tone quality is great because he spends the time to do it. And then for me, there are different things like rhythmic precision, or I think, even dynamics, like I want more movement, to the music, or more interest kind of to the music. We're not just playing the notes beautifully, but we're playing it with like some sort of kind of meaning or purpose. So those are the things that I usually stop for. And you can kind of tell in my groups that they're a little bit better at those things than his groups are, right? But I think neither one of us are using willpower to try to do this. It's just that I have such an aesthetic for that in music that when I hear something other than that, then it's just cringe inducing, right? And there's like another person I play with, we'll call him guitarist. Guitarist has perfect pitch, right? And so if I'm playing and it's even slightly out of tune, it's like driving him crazy, because he just has an aesthetic for that perfect pitch and he wants everything to be perfectly in tune. So I don't even rely on my own ears to tune when I'm playing with him. I just use like an electric tuner to get it perfectly in tune. But it's like when you have like this sense of yourself as being X, or when you have this particular aesthetic for X, it's like you don't need willpower at all in order to do it. Like if you think of yourself as being like successful in school, for instance, like I did, that there was no willpower involved. I had whatever it was, I saw myself, I identified with that, or I had this aesthetic for success, then that's just kind of what you're going to end up doing. And I think you see that a lot in kind of these like hero worshipy type characters, like Thomas Edison, or maybe even like Elon Musk modernly, where they just had like this vision and they weren't really willing to tolerate something less, because they kind of had like this vision, not even for themselves, but the world, almost like this is the way the world, can and should look, kind of, and I'm not willing to tolerate less. And some people have that for like food, like a really strong reaction to food. This is prepared improperly, I'm not going to eat kind of rawish chicken. Not me, man. I can sit there and eat raw chicken all day, basically. I don't have the same, not super raw, but like a little undercooked or whatever, a little undercooked, whatever else it is that other people, something that's fallen on the floor, I'll go ahead and eat it. Other people don't. And it's just a different aesthetic, I think. What do you guys think about that?
I think aesthetic, if you think about why people have aesthetic for different things, and most people will try to correlate that to past event like they do with emotions, but you will find that very small children who have not gone through anything also have a natural preference for some things. And I recently come across research that says all these aesthetic or like instinctual reflex to emotions are actually passed down from our ancestor. So it's in the genes. The memory is in the gene. It's not in the brain.
Yeah, what do we call this? The genetic something that we do get passed down from our ancestors that's not just like the actual, what is it called? Epigenetics?
Yes, epigenetics.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, they did a research using the planarian worm, and they find that new generation of planarian worm would have memory of their ancestor. When
Really?
when they do like a learning condition, like they train a generation of worm where the food is and where the threat is, and then the next generation would have those memory.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense because you think of like how have animals instincts, to hunt this particular way or to do this particular thing? How have they evolved? And epigenetics makes a lot of sense that way. So kind of their you say emotional reaction, but you just mean kind of like, whatever reaction, psychological.
Yeah, whatever, like aesthetic preference.
Yeah, that something kind of just gets ingrained in you, like, hey, I'm not gonna do this a different way. I'm not gonna tolerate anything less. I'm not gonna just sit here and die. It's interesting because Arya loves snakes, and she tells me all these snake facts, and she says that most vipers are born without the instinct to even eat, to survive. Like you have to force feed them during the first years. And I was like, well, how do they survive in the wild? These vipers who don't have the instinct to even like, oh, here's food, I'll go ahead and eat this food or whatever. And she's like, I think the death rates are just high. Some of them just maybe accidentally, or some of them are like, oh, I guess this kind of was a good idea, just try it out or something. Like babies are always putting stuff in their mouths or something. So I thought that was interesting. What do you think about this, Elsa?
Yeah, I mean, like what Victoria said, I agree with that. And I think I also read about these worms or whatever it was. I also think that's really interesting. And like with the snakes, I mean, I'm not a snake expert, but like that's like really weird. I'm really surprised. I wouldn't have thought that there is like animals that do not have the instinct to eat. Because how did the species survive? I think that's really interesting. I really have to Google that later.
Yeah. Man, what do they call them? I forget what they call them, the snake community or whatever. But maybe it's like not zero inclination to eat, but it's like very low for what you would expect a normal baby animal. Because the most baby animals come out being like, okay, where's my mom? Or like, where's the food source? Depending on what type of animal they are. So this is interesting. But what do you think about this aesthetic? Where is this aesthetic coming from? Is it just epigenetics? Is it just coming from our ancestors?
I think it's like probably like a combination of like several things. I think like the ancestors do have something to do with that, but I think not everything, because I mean, you and your brother are different. So, or you were talking about your brother, right?
Right. Yep. Brother.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And but so you have like the same ancestors, so you should like be the same or like the same things, have the same aesthetics, but you do not. So I think there's also like some personal preferences, and I don't know how they are.
I think not all siblings, even twins, they won't have the same genetic readout, even if they have the same gene.
Mm-hmm.
Not all the same genes will get expressed.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting too. Another story, even kind of going back to the podcast, I'll tell you this one, because he kind of attributed it to genetics, but I also attribute it to an aesthetic. And it's interesting because it sounds like there wasn't this aesthetic for it in the family. So the researcher DeSteno, he tells the story of how his dad made him do coding camp and other academic activities during the summer, every summer, so that DeSteno would have better opportunities later in life, even though DeSteno just wanted to play sports and play games. And so he tells the story as one of gratitude. And he says, it did help me later in life, because rather than, he was the first to go to university in his family. And then not only did he go to university, but he obviously got his PhD, right? And he's been, quite a success. He's a professor now of psychology. And so he kind of uses this one as, he tells the story of gratitude, but I see it as one of, again, aesthetic, because he even said, his dad, he didn't use the word aesthetic, but his dad had such a strong aesthetic and belief that this was how things should be for his son, that his dad was willing to spend the money that they didn't really have and had to ask for other relatives, like, hey, can you like contribute some money, for this coding camp or whatever. And had to put up with DeSteno's complaints about it, because he was like all the time complaining about, oh, I don't want to go. But like, why would the dad do this then if it was like such a disadvantage to him? And I thought, this has nothing to do with gratitude. I don't know why he's telling this story. I thought, at least, I was like, this all seems to be like the dad has such an aesthetic that his son is going to, be educated. And he's going to be, academically oriented, or like do a profession, or, live a life of the mind, rather than just like playing sports and kind of doing, something that's less a life of the mind. What do you guys, any thoughts about that one?
I can relate to this one because I'm also the first in my family to go to college and to be doing a PhD right now. So it's kind of the same story, but it's my mom.
Oh, your mom, really? Okay.
Yes,
so your mom was like, here it is. And so you can kind of see like the influence that your parents would have. And I had a similar story. Like I was like, music's fine. And I'd practice the piano almost like a robot or whatever. But then my parents were like, okay, you have to take a music class at school. And I was like, fine, I guess I'll just do band and I'll play the cymbals. That's what I did my first year in high school or whatever, because I was like, I don't want to learn the music. Doesn't matter. I mean, you can kind of intuit when the crash cymbals come in. You're like, yeah, crash, I was like, this is fun and we'll just do this or whatever. But I had no aesthetic for kind of like music other than that. It took a couple more years of kind of being in like, oh, once you reach a certain skill level, then you're like, I was like, I like this, now I have kind of an aesthetic for this. And so I went on to like become a music major, even though I was like the whole time thinking I was going to major in some science or something while I was in high school.
There's like this one research about that people, they kind of like, if they get something, then they want the thing they get. Like, I think they did it like with some object. So they gave.
Chocolate bars, right? Yeah. If I give you a chocolate bar and somebody else gets a coffee mug, Man, who is it?
Yeah, and then you like the one
Kahneman
you
and
got.
Tversky, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's also the same like with activities. So you're doing something, you're forced to do it, and then suddenly like you kind of start to like it, even though it's not, and you continue with that because you start to like it because you started with that. So I think maybe that's with you and the music. So you were forced to do it, and then somehow because you had to do it anyway, you started to like it, and then you became better, and then you liked it even more. I think this is sometimes how people like get into some hobbies, because they just try, or because they just forced to try something, and then they start to like it because they kind of have to like it from their like brain.
Yeah, or even using your example of the runners, they have to force themselves, they get in a habit, but then they actually end up liking it. They do like to, get out and do the run or whatever. So we only have like a minute left. It's kind of interesting. Maybe we'll try to do maybe we'll have everybody think about this and come back and do another kind of session on this, because one of the things that Desteno is trying to argue is that you can actually kind of cultivate whatever this is. He calls it an emotional response. We've been kind of calling it an aesthetic. And he says you can cultivate it in a way that kind of like Buddhist monks, where you don't have to use willpower as often, because it's a habit or because it's an aesthetic. It's something that you're just used to doing. That's just who you are. And so of course you're going to act that way because, that's somehow become either part of your identity or part of your existence or part of your epigenetics, whatever else it is. So it'd be interesting if to come back and talk about, how can you cultivate this? How can you kind of manipulate yourself in order to kind of make it so you don't have to use willpower that often? So no, there were no comments in the chat. And thank you, Elsa and Victoria, for your ideas. They were very insightful as always. Great to get your scientific kind of analysis and expertise on this. And we'll see everybody next week.